How's it going, everyone? I wanted to do a video discussing the Saab market, meaning the values of these cars, where they were in the past versus where they are now and where they're headed in the future. Unless you've been living under a rock the past 2.5, 3 years or so, you'll know that car prices have really just absolutely gone crazy, not just for Saabs, but everything. Now, there's certain reasons why overall the car market has kind of exploded, but with the Saab market in particular, I think there are some unique circumstances with Saabs that make it a little bit different and might impact where the market for them is going in the future. I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this video. I'll start with the past. The past is going to be defined by pretty much pre-COVID. So obviously COVID kind of changed our world in early 2020. Clearly, Saab models and prices vary a solid amount based on trim, model, mileage, condition, a million different things. So I'm going to be doing a lot of generalizing in this video. But before COVID, any decent Saab, and I say decent, I don't mean absolutely pristine, perfect, low mileage, but I'd say the average Saab could be had for $2,000 to $3,000 in most models, if not less. I mean, we'd see 9.3 linears with 120,000 miles that were selling for $1,500. If anyone tried to get more than $2,500 for their run-of-the-mill 9.3, people thought they were crazy. The V6 9.3s were a little bit more valuable than that, but you'd rarely see any 9.3s or 9.5s for that matter as well ask anywhere north of $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 regardless of model or trim, with the exception of maybe like a Turbo X or a really low mileage pristine car. You could find a $500 Saab pretty easily. These things were a dime a dozen back then, really. And this was kind of before the point where the classic Saabs, meaning classic 900s and older, really started to go up in value. So with that sort of established, I want to go ahead and talk about where we stand today with the Saab market. And I'm going to kind of classify that as the COVID era. Since COVID hit, there's been a big issue with the new car market with the chip shortage. Cars aren't able to get their chips that they need to be finalized and ready to be shipped off and sold to customers. So because of that, there's been a very limited supply of new cars, relatively speaking, to before COVID, and that has drastically impacted the value of used cars, including Saab. So while the chip shortage doesn't directly affect the Saab market, I do think it's definitely part of the reason why we've seen an increase in their value. So there's still deals to be had on Saabs, people trying to get rid of them soon, people not knowing what they have, or people just selling them for cheaper than they could be worth. But with that said, it is much harder to find clean, nice, not necessarily even low mileage, but just a good, clean, solid condition 9.3, 9.5 for $1,000 to $3,000. Any of your 9.3s or 9.5s or MG 900s, OG 9.3s that you might find now that are kind of in that $2,000 or less price range generally have a lot of problems, a lot of mileage, or a sketchy history of some sort. Most of these cars that are even in fair condition, we'll say, which I guess is a little bit below average, a lot of these are even still selling for upwards of $3,000. Stepping away from the GM era Saabs, the classic Saabs, the 900s, the 99s especially, have just absolutely skyrocketed in value. I mean, the 900s pre-COVID, I almost bought one about 4 years ago. It was in pretty nice shape for like $700 they wanted. And now, a comparable 900, that's in decent shape, you'd be hard pressed to find one that's under $5,000 to $7,000, if that, depending on year, spec, mileage, things like that. But we've seen some crazy auction prices for a lot of these lately, which I don't think is terribly indicative of where the market is at. But the pristine, clean 900s are selling for $20K and above now, where before they might be $5,000, $7,000 cars. In today's market, you'll see a lot of cars listed, and I know listing price versus selling price is obviously different, but a lot of these cars are being sold for what they're listing at, or at least very close to that. When I sold my Turbo X, for example, I bought it in 2018. This is actually a good example of this. I bought it in 2018 for $8,000, so pre-COVID. It had 171,000 miles on it. It had a couple of mods, but not a ton. I sold it at the beginning of this year, early 2022, for $15,500. It had almost 200,000 miles on it, but it had a lot of recent work done to it, a lot of valuable modifications that the seller obviously valued. So there's, take that with a grain of salt, but it also kind of shows that the market, has valued these cars more in, I guess, current times. But it's not really crazy uncommon to see the average run-of-the-mill, nice condition 9.3 that's decently low mileage, we're listing for $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, or even more, whether it be a 2.0. The V6s especially have gone up in price. So it's really crazy to see how a lot of these have just increased in value. So because of this, all Saabs, not just the classics, not just the GM era, all of them have risen in value in the COVID era. With the past and present established, I think it begs the question, where is the Saab market going in the future? So at some point, everyone says at some point the chip shortage is going to solve itself. Used car prices are going to go back to where they were pre-COVID. I have seen that the used car market is slowing down some. I don't think it's slowing down at the rate that a lot of experts are saying it is, just based off of prices from what I'm seeing for stuff. So when it comes to will these cars go down in value, in my opinion, I don't think the classics will come down again in value, if at all. At this point, they are truly reaching that classic status. The newest classic 900s are 30 years old, and before that, obviously, you just get older and older. There's less and less of them on the road, especially less and less that are in good shape. So I don't think the value of 900s or 99s or two-stroke Saabs or Sonnets, things like that, will really ever come down again. I think the GM era Saabs, on the other hand, will see a little bit of a dip, not in the same sense that they'll reach the point of pre-COVID prices where they're a dime a dozen, $500 9.3s are plenty. But I do think that they'll probably come back down a little bit because they're kind of at that weird phase where they're not quite classics yet, but they're also not necessarily at the bottom of their depreciation curve anymore. It kind of depends on where they're at. I'd say pre-COVID, a lot of them were at the cheapest point that they would ever be. And for a lot of reasons, they couldn't really have gotten any cheaper than a lot of them were listed for, if that makes sense. And going off of that, as time passes, more and more of these cars are getting taken off the road, whether it be because of accidents, mechanical failures that the owners don't want to repair, or a number of different reasons they're getting taken off the road. So we're seeing less and less nice condition Saabs of any model on the roads, which I think is kind of indirectly leading to a very slight bump in the value for the nicer ones, because it is hard to find them. With that in mind though, I do think it means that the mint condition, the pristine examples of any model Saab, especially the GM era ones though, since that's what I'm kind of talking about here, are going to kind of retain that value. I think the average run-of-the-mill GM era Saab might see a little bit of a dip at some point soon, but again, I don't think they'll go back to their pre-COVID prices. So I think that's really kind of my update or my opinion as well on the Saab market, both past, present, and future. Let me know your thoughts on this analysis. Do you agree? Do you disagree? I feel pretty confident in everything I've said here, and I think it will ring true. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Help me reach my goal of 100,000 subscribers. I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, I'll have some 900 content up here very soon, and I should also have some more 9.3 content coming as well. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.